All right, let's go ahead and get going. Really appreciate everybody's time today. We'll get into some kind of quick introductions here in just a second, but today's webinar, we typically do one webinar at least once per month, the last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of the month. And so today we're going to be talking about like the 5 ways to elevate the typical kind of award, grant, and scholarship review and selection process. Kind of based off of industry best practices and really kind of common trends that we're seeing within the space. I don't want to say that this is great timing for it, but I actually had a conversation this morning with a membership-based association doing a recognition award. And for them, they weren't able to redact any information from the review team's perspective. It was a peer review. So it was members who were actually doing the judging on other members. And so, since they were not able to redact any of the information, they had a ton of concerns. And they're actually able to see in real time some of the committee members putting in personal biases against certain candidates that influence the results. So while we hate seeing that type of stuff happen, it happens on a daily basis, and that's actually why we built Reviewer. And it's also the type of experiences that really spurred, today's discussion around kind of the 5 ways that elevate the review process. So when I say elevate in the 5 different ways, obviously some of that's going to be operational, but at the end of the day, most of the people on today's webinar are mission-driven groups who are doing a wide variety of programs. While we did build Reviewer to help you save a substantial amount of time and energy managing these programs, at the end of the day, you make up a very small percentage of the overall volume, right? Your applicants, your committee members, your board members, your nominators, they make up between 60 to 75% of the volume. So how do we elevate their experience and kind of get the most out of it? So with that said, we'll kind of get into some quick introductions as well as today's agenda. I will be hopping back and forth between kind of a high level presentation to help guide the conversation, but on also previewing Reviewer at the same time, not necessarily to showcase all the great things that we're doing, but also more so to kind of visualize some of these components and some of these theories that we're going to talk about. That way you can kind of take some of it away and apply it to your program. So with that said, I'll kind of give a quick introduction of who I am at Reviewer and then kind of what I want to talk about today. So my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. Very, very fortunate now to be doing this for well over 10 years. We built Reviewer, the name Reviewer for a reason because we are part of the volunteer review committee member. So everything from funding opportunities, scholarships, grants, recognition programs, you name it. And so we lived and we witnessed firsthand the many, many different kind of components that go into running awards, scholarships, grants, abstracts, you name it, for a wide type of variety of programs. So back in 2012, we lived through the binders and the spreadsheets. So we had hundreds and hundreds of binders being mailed to our doorstep. We were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and comments and scores and doing deliberations. We went through that kind of digital transformation in the 2016 timeframe when all these kind of organizations went online. And what that typically meant was, their AMSs, downloading of documents, emails, storing them online, folder systems, and lots of spreadsheets. And so again, all the different components and moving parts that go into these programs. We've lived a life in your shoes. We totally understand the very overwhelming nature that goes into managing it. But then also we've seen, I mentioned before the conversation this morning, where the review team was taking personal biases against candidates. We've seen firsthand submissions that are being sent in through email with attachments go to spam filters, and then review committees actually selecting results to find out months later that there were a handful of applicants who never even got included in the selection. So at this point in time, I'm very fortunate to say that we work with thousands of organizations in a really wide variety of industries doing really, really great things. And so, at Reviewer, not only do we provide like the online infrastructure and the software to power the entire life cycle of these campaigns from literally start to finish, but also hopefully over the years, we've seen enough really, really great things and processes and workflows that we can host these webinars, or, if we begin working together during the setup and during the onboarding process, kind of auditing or looking at kind of what it is that your current programs look like, what you're trying to accomplish, and then both making recommendations on features that we have that I think would serve you really, really well. But also taking a look at our portfolio and saying, hey, here's XYZ organization that does something very similar. With that said, here's kind of what their processes look like. Do you want to incorporate any of that? Again, it's kind of our way to give back and elevate the space in general. So again, long story short, built the name Reviewer for a reason. We are part of review committee members, and that's really what's powering today's discussion. So I want to look at kind of five key topics here today. With that said, there is a built-in chat function. So in Zoom, if you have any questions or comments or things that you want to add to this discussion, I love to make this as engaging and adaptive as possible. So if you want to kind of shift conversations a little bit, if you want to expand on certain things, please do toss in whatever comments or questions you have, and we'll either incorporate it into the discussion, or we'll save it for the end for a Q&A. But so kind of at a high level, I don't want to get too deep into an agenda since we're going to run through it right now, but kind of the five core elements today. Number one is kind of reviewing applications, not nominations. So generally speaking, obviously we're going to talk about reviewer high level scholarships, awards, grants, whatever it might be. That is more so for those of you doing recognition awards. The general idea behind that is nominations are flawed. We want to use the actual content being submitted by the applicant. I want to talk about the distribution of collected submissions to your review committees. There are so many different ways that you can take your applications and assign them out to your team for review. At its core, though, I want to focus on kind of the benefits behind doing a random distribution. Kind of foreshadowing and jumping the gun to the bullet point number five. That does pose a very significant challenge, however, because anytime you have evaluators who are reviewing different applicants, so not every applicant is reviewed by the same people, you start to run into this challenge of what happens if some evaluators are just a stiffer or stricter judge than others, or what if they're a more lenient judge than others? How do you identify that and take that into consideration? Again, coming full circle to the conversation I had this morning, your application processes might have a whole bunch of information that you're collecting. Some of it might be for record keeping purposes. Some of it might be personal identifying information. How do we pick and choose what should be shared with our teams for selection and redact that shouldn't be shared? And then lastly, we'll kind of get into the accessing of deliverables, because at its core, the success of a successful review and selection workflow comes down to lowering the barrier for your review teams and for your volunteers, equipping them and empowering them to allocate the time and energy that the applicants deserve, while still putting forth kind of a thoughtful, judging, fair, non-biased selection process. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right into today's discussion, bullet point number one, which is going to be reviewing applications and not nominations. So again, this is very specific to award programs, but there's still a ton that you can take away from this if you're doing abstracts or other types of campaigns. So traditionally speaking, if you run an award program, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you'd have these nominations that get submitted. Sometimes it's a nomination about someone else, or sometimes it's a self-nomination that's being included amongst all the other ones. And your teams would sit down, you'd go through judging, review, and selection, and then you'd obviously make your award selections. The challenge with that is anybody who is doing a self-nomination is going to have a substantially better application than those that had a nomination about someone else. And that's just because they're going to put forth more time and energy because it's about themselves. Number two is their data likely will be significantly more accurate. This is just one high level example. But if you're collecting things like resumes or personal achievements, who knows more about themselves than themselves? And so one of the, models that we love to see at Reviewer is to break these awards into two dedicated processes. Number one is collecting nominations, and then number two is collecting the formal application from the nominee. So I'll show this to you, but ultimately, nominators come in, they tell you who they are, who they're nominating, and why. And then we leverage triggers to notify the nominee, and you can make those anonymous, etc., where they then come in and they're the ones who are filling out the bulk of the application. So when it comes to like time, energy, effort levels, data accuracy, dates, and deadlines, you're creating an even playing field because again, all the content being submitted and reviewed is coming directly from the source. So, this is going to sound so bad, but if I was to nominate my wife for an award and she was to nominate me, her nomination would just be light years better. It's not that I don't love her to death. She's just a better writer than I am. And so is that a fair representation on me, the nominee, or is it more so the person who is submitting it? So with that type of thought process, let's just kind of eliminate it. We'll leverage nominations as a way to increase volume, do marketing pushes, get the word out, engage your membership. But then let's just solely focus on the nominees. It's also great too for you to kind of engage with them and open doors of communication, which maybe from a membership perspective, we've struggled with in the past. So again, lower the barrier. The last thing that I want to kind of add to that is while this may not be a nomination, many of you may be collecting references. That's very common for both award programs, scholarships, even some grant making nowadays, fellowship programs, speaker call for presenters. And so anytime you're asking people to submit a reference, we have to lower the barrier because writing a reference letter is both time consuming and challenging. You're asking somebody to sit down from scratch, come up with an idea, and turn it into a letter format. Where some people are just better writers than others. Some people are going to put forth better effort. So, again, is that a fair representation of the candidate that the reference is being submitted for? Or is it more so just a representation of the person writing the letter? So, maybe instead of doing reference letters, we opt for reference templates. So the reference gets notified, they come in, and then like, what are the 3 to 5 questions that you want references to fill out on behalf of the applicant? So instead of coming up with an idea from scratch, we lower the barrier. There's answering a series of questions. But then when you go to do a review and selection process, you're comparing apples to apples because every single applicant has the same reference kind of content or deliverables submitted amongst themselves. We'll also get into like data redaction later on, but it's very, very challenging to redact personal identifying information from file uploads or external documents like a reference. Whereas if they were to kind of free enter in like a question and answer type of format, it opens the door to a lot more flexibility for you. So with that said, I kind of want to focus on like what does that look like. So I'm going to jump into review just at a high level. In this example, it's kind of configured not as a nominator nominee portion. It's more so just like filling out an application. I think it does a really good job kind of showcasing what it would look like. So generally speaking, with all of our clients, they want to use their own websites, which makes total sense. You have content control, branding control. Why wouldn't we leverage that? And so they use what I call like a landing page. And that landing page is a way for you to kind of outline dates, deadlines, criteria, expectations. One thing I also love to see, and this is again not necessarily related to the review process, but called a proof of process, which is a public statement that says, hey, if you're applying or if you're going to be submitting to my campaign, here's what you're going to go through. Here's like the type of questions that we're going to ask you. You're going to be reviewed by this many people. This is the score sheet that you're going to use. And that way, when you go to do the review and selection, you can map that back to your proof of process to ensure that you kind of followed through with what you said. So what I would do is if I'm in a Word program, I want to break this into 2 processes. I'm going to give the applicant a nomination form, and it's going to be super short and simple. It's going to say, who are you? Who are you nominating and why? As soon as they submit, it triggers a notification to the nominee. The nominee would then come in and it would say, hey, you've been nominated for the XYZ program. Click here to register. And that's kind of where they would begin their journey on a page like this. Now, this is a critical component of reviewer. Again, my goal today is not to get into the applications, it's more so the dual process. But this is a critical component because there are so many moving parts to these programs. You've got people, submissions, plural, because you might have the initial applications or nominations. You might have additional forms being submitted from the applicants throughout their journey. You might have like post selection deliverables. You got file uploads, communication, judges, and scores that are coming in. So the idea behind creating a profile is that we take all those moving parts that I just mentioned and we centralize them into one hub. So applicants come in, they put in who they are, and this is where they would begin their journey. So applicants at this point are the nominees. And again, we don't have to worry about nominators maybe having inaccurate information about them. The nominee comes in, they fill out a series of questions, they fill out their short answers, they fill out their essay questions, they do their file uploads. And then as soon as this gets submitted, I now have Kyle, the applicant, who then has a bunch of line items for all the nominations that got submitted. And I'm going to show this to you. So again, I don't want to get too deep into showcasing the front end submission process in Reviewer. That's for maybe a future conversational webinar. I just wanted to introduce kind of that dual process of how if I was to run in a Word program, that's how I would do so. The next thing that we're going to look into, which is really the bread and butter of today, is going to be the evaluation side of things. So, number one is that from a review team's perspective, we have to lower the workload capacities for them. And the only way that we can do so is to get a better feel for what are those workload capacities. We have some of our clients that we've heard from in the past that historically would have, let's just make up a number, 100 submitted applications. And they would have the review team review each of those 100. And quite frankly, that's not possible. Like a review evaluator cannot give the same time and energy to submission number 84 that they gave number 1 and 2. And so we have to kind of figure out, probably through surveying and talking with your committees, like what is your ideal workload capacity? Like how long does it take you to submit one? How many do you want to do? And then leverage that data to influence how you pair them up with your applicant. So the name of the game here is ensuring a fair, non-biased and selection process by both reducing their barrier but then also controlling what they can see and when. So I personally love using randomization tools. So if you would have come to me and you said, you know what, my team told me that on average they can score about 15 submissions. I would also then start to ask, okay, great. Well, then how many evaluations should each applicant have? Maybe you're going to say, you know what, I want every applicant to get scored exactly 5 times, but I don't want my review team to score any more than 20. So with that type of mindset, I don't want you to have to come in there and do a bunch of math and figure out like how many should be assigned to who, which applicants are going to get reviewed by which review committee members, because all that's going to happen is we may accidentally be pairing people up with evaluators that they shouldn't. It's also going to take you just a significant amount of time and energy to kind of go through that decision making process. So for me, I'm probably going to start with like a framework of how you want to do a review. Is it going to be on a per category, per award, per scholarship basis? Is it going to be on a per phase basis? So phase one review, phase two review, final selection. Is it a combination of both? That call I mentioned I had this morning, this organization had two very different categories, but then within each one of them, they had subcategories. And then within each of those subcategories, they wanted to randomly distribute the applications to a dedicated team of reviewers. So first, we have to kind of build the framework, and then I'll show you how in reviewer will power that. With that said, and I already kind of influenced this a bit earlier on, anytime you have different applicants being reviewed by different committee members, we have to be on the lookout for judging trends. Are some of your evaluators or are some of your judges scoring higher or lower than the average? And if so, what are we going to do with it? We'll end today's conversation looking at that, but anytime you do random judge distribution, like that is going to be a factor. So just get ahead of that now. So with that said, like what does this visually look like? The best way for me to describe this would be a concept called buckets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you in reviewer workflows. So the way that I have this configured is a grant program, but again, this is relevant to multiple award categories, subcategories, scholarships, abstracts, speaker tracks, you name it. But the general idea here is that we have to take a bucket and we need to do two things. We need to fill it up with a bunch of submissions, and we have to fill it up with a team of eligible evaluators or judges. So ideally using some type of intelligent automation in reviewer, the submission process, the system will recognize like what track or what category that they're applying for. And then as soon as they submit, it'll drop their application or drop their profile directly into that bucket. So looking at this example, I have the Lennox Wilder grant. We're going to make an assumption that that's full of applicants who applied to the Lennox Wilder grant. The next step is off to the right. I've got a team of potential evaluators. So Simon, Paula, Mark, and Judge Judy. When they come into reviewer, they're only going to have access to the applications or submissions in the bucket that you gave them access to. Looking at the top, I have Sally, Sue, Steve, and Sarah. When they come into reviewer, they won't see any applications to the Lennox Wilder grant because they were not put into that bucket. So it's kind of at a high level how we create structure, categories, phases, whatever it might be. With that said, what if we had 100 submissions in the Lennox Wilder grant? So just because Simon is assigned to it doesn't mean that Simon should review all 100 of them. So what we'll do at this point is we'll open our buckets up, and this is where it's going to show us the pairing system. So this one already has some assignments that were made by default. It would show 0, but it's going to show you two things. One is a list of all of the applicants in that particular bucket. And then two is it's going to show you a list of your potential staff. So the next step is to figure out who should Barney, Gabrielle, and Gilligan be assigned to for review. So what I would typically do at this point is I would bulk select all my applications, and I would say, let's just give every single applicant to 5 random reviewers. So at random, the system will take all of your reviewers, all of your judges, and then divvy it out equally amongst your staff to ensure that every single person gets reviewed exactly 5 times, no more, no less. Alternatively, or in conjunction with, you could take your entire review team and say, let's just give every single reviewer no more than 20, because that's their workload capacity, but no less than maybe 12 or 15 to ensure that every applicant still gets enough eyes on the review. The system will then take all of your submissions and then randomly distribute it back out. So this works really well, again, from a compliance perspective. We can promise our membership or our applicant pool that when you apply, we're not going to be pairing up with potentially biased reviewers. We're just going to randomly give it out. With that said, we do have to have a way for the review team to recuse themselves. So in these scorecards, I love to see a question that says, like, do you have a conflict of interest or should you be recused? If they choose yes, it'll flag it for us. So we can then jump in here and say, well, Mark just recused himself from Gabrielle. So currently he's assigned to these 4 applicants. I would just unselect which one he was recused from and then reassign it back out to somebody else. So that's how I want to go about taking bulk groups of applicants and then give them to your team. The next piece of this puzzle is going to be the redaction of data. So just because Mark was given a bunch of submissions, the next piece is that Mark physically cannot know who they are. For some of you, that's totally fine. Again, this is generally broadly speaking. But if there's any chance or any way that the review team will have a personal bias against a candidate, we have to eliminate it. So what does that look like? So the redaction of private information is a broad term. Your submission processes might have, I'm going to make up a number, 50 questions in your submission form. Of those 50 questions, maybe only 5 of them include personal identifying information. However, you might have a bunch of other questions that you're asking for that just aren't relevant to the judging process. It's more for internal record keeping purposes. If that is the case, we should also redact that as well. We want to show the review team only the content being evaluated. That way they're not getting overwhelmed or lowering the barrier. We're keeping them hyper focused on the task at hand. With that said, if you are hiding personal identifying information, my recommendation to this is basically if you think it's potentially personal identifying information, or if you think the response to that particular question may influence a judge, then hide it. Right? There's no gray area. It's just err on the side of caution. I would say generally speaking, PII consists of obviously who they are. So name, address, email, phone number. It could be ID numbers. It could be membership information, tax records, student records. With that said, it could also be information about like their employment or their race or their ethnicity, right? Any type of thing like that. When it gets to the redacting of data, there's kind of two different ways to go about it. There's content being directly put into a platform, ideally a reviewer, first name, last name, email. If that's the case, we in real time can automatically redact it. No time or energy is required from your team's perspective. The system knows that's a name, therefore it'll automatically hide it from the review team's point of view. Where this becomes a bit more challenging is if it's content being submitted like in an essay or free text, or if it comes in the form of a file upload. So what I would recommend is since there's no automatic way to identify that and then pull it back out, whatever provider that you're working with to power your programs, you have to make sure it's very, very easy to review the content, catch it, and if you do need to redact it automatically or redact it manually, to be able to do so very, very efficiently and very, very quickly. I would also say too that this is also going to influence how you structure your submission processes. So if you know for a fact that this type of deliverable often has personal identifying information, aka a reference, so let's just not do file uploads. Let's instead have them directly input it into reviewer. That way, if you do have to do manual redaction, it's significantly easier for you to do so. So what does that physically look like for the review team? So I'm going to kind of keep going, and then we're going to come back to reviewer because I'm going to tie this in with some other kind of discussion points. So the next thing I want to look at is going to be just the ease of access, right? So we're redacting the data. Now the review teams have to actually physically view the contents and go through a judging process. So going back to like the sharing of sensitive information, at this point in time, like we just physically cannot be taking anything that has personal identifying information and transmitting it through email or spreadsheets or downloading of documents. It's just not a secure way of doing it. For those of you on this webinar who are doing things like scholarship programs and you have like FAFSA data or fund disbursement forms or grant reporting templates, we also have to consider like the downloading of the deliverables and then storing it offline. Now, my promise is again, we can't prevent a review committee member or a staff member from like grabbing their iPhone and then taking a picture of the computer. Like that still very well could happen. But if we know that there's a certain deliverable that we would prefer that they don't store, right? Once the program wraps up, we want to permit access to them. We can remove like access levels or permit downloading of deliverables. Again, can we fully prevent them from accessing it? No, but we can lower the barrier and make it significantly more challenging to do so. So I just want you to think through, like, obviously, from a time or efficiency perspective, or really just a reflection on your organization. We don't want to be taking your submissions, your applications, downloading them, exporting them, recompiling them, shipping them off to review teams, giving them a bunch of spreadsheets. Like, that's just not an efficient way to manage processes. It opens the door to a bunch of challenges. But then on top of that, it kind of gets into like the compliance side of things. So The other thing I want to reference is that more times than not, your committee members and your review teams are volunteers. If they're not volunteers, there's a million things. We wear a lot of hats, right? My initial gut instinct is that playing in spreadsheets and downloading of documents and doing email is not like their highest payoff activity. So we have to make sure that when they come in to do the review and selection process, they're able to very quickly and very efficiently do it while still giving the applicant the time and energy that they deserve. So what I mean by that is they have to be able to save, they can log out, they can come back later. Many of them might be doing this once they put their kids to bed or early in the morning on off hours. We want to make sure that we give them a side-by-side review so they can physically view the content that they're evaluating next to their note-taking tools and their selection tools. That way they're not downloading things using other tools and then coming back later. If you are doing documents, file uploads, I hate to see you use a platform to collect a bunch of stuff and do judging, but them having to kind of go off and use other platforms. So I use Mac. So if you were to send me, like, say, for example, a PowerPoint, I can't open it. I'm cheap. I'm not using Microsoft Office on my Mac. I'm using like the free off or Mac tools. So I physically can't view it. You also might be having applicants submitting deliverables in a ton of different formats. You don't want to be going back to them and saying, hey, you submitted a .pages document. Our team can't view it. Now, can you re-upload to something else? We don't want to have any of those limitations. So in Reviewer, we'll embed those documents right in the app itself. It doesn't matter if it's an image, PowerPoint, spreadsheet, .pages, whatever it might be. Your team will be able to physically view it in the app on any type of device, from a tablet to their computer, from a Mac, you name it. Again, it's all about lowering the barriers. They're going to enter at a given time to conduct a review. Let's be as efficient as humanly possible during that time slot. So, with that said, what does that look like? So, before I showcase Reviewer, the last thing we're going to kind of incorporate to that discussion is the quantitative scoring. We really should be avoiding, if possible, subjective deliberations. Now, I understand that using score sheets and mathematic-based rubrics doesn't always tell the full story about a candidate, and that's totally fine. But I think it is a good starting place. So what I would prefer to see happen is your review team come in, they use some type of mathematic-based scorecard. Again, I'm going to show this to you. I also don't want them to see the scores, if that makes sense. Like, judges get very bogged down in numbers. So don't ask them to answer on a series of, like, on a 20-point scale. How do they differentiate a 17 versus an 18, right? So maybe instead ask them to answer a series of questions. Is this question good, great, or ugly? Thumbs up, thumbs down. How do you feel about it? So they're answering these questions very emotionally, and then behind the scenes, we are leveraging like automatic scorecards and number crunching that will output results for you. So the general idea here is that the review team is coming in, they have a guided judging process. It kind of keeps the playing field even, where every single judge has a very clear kind of parameter that they're reviewing them on. That way they're not, the expectations are the same for all of them. You may also want to consider doing weighted scoring. So your organization obviously has mission and vision and values. There might be, so if you're a scholarship provider, maybe you care more about like the community impact and the volunteering of the applicant, or more about like their essay writing and their references. GPA is important, but it's less important than that. So don't treat them as equal. Weight the essay writing at a higher weighted average than the GPA. Now, where that becomes challenging is obviously without a platform like Reviewer. Now you're having to do a lot of number crunching. And this is, again, terrible, but I've seen so many times where judges are kind of filling out like spreadsheets with their scores and the results, and they ship it back to you. You then have to recompile it with all the other scorecards. What happens if you miss a row or if the formulas are off, right? So we want to leave the math and the automation to a platform like Reviewer. And again, I'll show you this to you. For those that are doing judge disbursements, we have to be able to normalize the results. So long-winded, we just talked about three different kind of bullet points there. Let's now kind of physically view that entire workflow at one time. So in Reviewer, when your review committees come in, they get a menu system. Right off the bat, no, Reviewer is not blurry. This is just my way of indicating that you can redact information. So the review team comes in and they're going to see some type of menu system of who they're supposed to look at. Again, I might be logging in at 8:30 on a Wednesday night. If I put my son to bed, I want to be very, very efficient. So it's going to show me where I left off, which ones are yet to be reviewed, how I've done my reviews. From here, they'll just simply open up the ID of the candidate. And then you're going to notice that they have a split screen. So half of the page is going to be the submission form or their deliverables, and then the other half is their selection tool. So again, all of this data is being redacted in real time. Nobody had to physically go through every single submission and redact their name and their email. It just happens on its own. My review team can jump up here. They can go to the attachments. They can press view. Again, it could be a photo, it could be a video, it could be a PDF. I don't really care. That deliverable will embed itself right next to my score sheet. So I can kind of side by side answer a series of questions, fill up my score sheets. I can leave notes to myself. If you are doing references, I mentioned earlier on that I hate to see reference uploads. I would instead rather do like a reference template. Or maybe this is an award program. And in this example, my applicant had 6 different people nominate her. This menu system will show you all of the references or all of the nominations. If I press view, it actually shows me the content right here of whatever that additional form was that was submitted. So your team can very efficiently kind of toggle back and forth and in real time, log their scores off to the right. I also want to kind of point out here, I'm going to go ahead and refresh here. I think I might be freezing on us. There we go. I do want to kind of point out the score sheet off to the right is leveraging let's jump ahead. It's leveraging a question and answer based prompt. So the judge is not picking on like a sliding scale of 1 to 10 or 1 through 20. It just says, hey, rate this applicant's achievements from poor to great. And so they're filling it out, they're answering it. This one does show the point value, although you can absolutely hide that if you want to. But at the end of the day, they're going to submit their score, and then you get this leaderboard. So this leaderboard is incredibly powerful because it allows you on a per bucket basis, again, per grant, per scholarship, per award, per category, get a real-time listing of every applicant that applied, the individual committees and teams that evaluated it, and then how they did their scores. So from here, you can bulk select people and advance them from one phase to the next. You're not recompiling data, you're not crunching numbers. I do want to point out, though, that there's something problematic going on here. So Sheldon here was scored by Mark with a score of 12, but Judge Judy gave it a score of 31. So we have to ask ourselves, did Mark just really not like Sheldon and score it really, really low? Or what if Mark never gives higher than, say, for example, a 14 and a 12 was actually a tremendous score? In its current traditional model, anybody who is being scored by Mark is going to be lower in the rankings. Like that just physically isn't fair. So what do we do? This is a report that I'm going to kind of showcase for you. This is actually a real program. It's a Ivy League university that historically ran into this challenge, and they had applicants go unfunded because of some evaluators that just scored unfair. Or I shouldn't say unfair, they just scored more strict than others. So I redacted the data, but you can see that we basically have a list, right, of all of the applicants who got evaluated. And then it shows us on a per question basis in the scorecard how each individual judge scored. So Steve scored question 1 as an 8. What you really care about, though, is this green section. So this is at the end, and it takes every single one of your evaluators or your judges, and it compiles their own personal averages. So again, this is a real client of ours that did this. We've got Judge Judy here. Obviously, that's not the real judge, who on average scores just about a 24. You've got Tony over here, who on average scores just about a 34. That is so problematic because literally anybody who Judge Judy scores on average scores 10 points lower than Tony. Using a traditional scoring methodology, anybody who Judge Judy scores will never be ranked higher than anybody that Tony scores. So now we know this. So what do? We start to create baselines. So now we know that on average, Judge Judy scores, let's just round up and say 24. So if this was a 24, instead of saying 24, it would say 1. 1 means completely average. Anything higher than 24 is above a 1. Anything lower than 24 is below a 1. So now that we have each individual judge's personal averages, we've now centered the scores by comparing the individual results against their average. We can then take all of those averages and kick out a new leaderboard. So we have Bruce Banner here, who is actually our #1 candidate, who on average scores 1.15, 1.16 higher than average. Our lowest rated applicant, Elon, has a 0.83. So almost, 0.2 lower, 20% lower than average. And so can you use this for your results reporting? Yes, we have a ton of clients that will just run this report and they'll use this ranking as their end all be all decision-making matrix. Others will instead use that dashboard that I talked about, and they'll use this scorecard to kind of combine it and kind of figure out what they want to do. Many groups will actually use this dashboard for deliberation purposes. And then like on a Zoom call or in person, they let the teams kind of hash it out and they kind of bring up that report and they open up the applications to kind of share with their team, okay, here's kind of what the results look like why did you score to 12 versus why did you score to 31. Just because reviewer builds leaderboards for you doesn't necessarily mean that we give you the end all be all results. We just want to give you the data to make informed decisions off of it. So what kind of questions can I start to answer, again, about the review process, the industry best practices about reviewer. I'm open to sitting here and answering whatever questions you might have, either for me or if you are doing some of these things or you have insights that you want to offer that might provide value to the audience, by all means, toss them into the chat. Yeah. So what is the industry best practice for the ideal number of reviewers for a scholarship applicant? So a couple things come into play. Number one is you have to get a feel for what your applicant pool is. I would say on average, each submission must be reviewed no less than usually 5 times. Maybe not even more than that, about five. That gives you a pretty good barometer on taking averages off of it. On top of that, though, we have to take into consideration how many evaluators you have. And to go back to the presentation, I think it's critical to be surveying and talking with our committees to figure out, on average, how long does it take you to fill out a score sheet? And we have some averages, but the general problem with this is that it's going to be dependent upon the length of the form as well as your score sheets. Some of our clients that do video submissions, those inherently are really, really engaging, but they will take longer to score. So once we have a better understanding of how long it's going to take a judge to do a score and what their kind of general preference is on how many they can do, then we can kind of make those decisions. The beauty of a platform like Reviewer, though, is that you might have different judging preferences by everybody. So if we know for a fact that everybody must get scored 5 times, there's no reason why Tony doesn't score 40 people and Susie scores 15, right? We're able to kind of make those adjustments and give each individual judge their own kind of personal preferences. So yeah, a question that came in about, there's an award program where the members will submit multiple nominations. So on behalf of their client. So me as Kyle might be a company who is submitting 6 or 7 different nominations on behalf of other clients. Um, the person that submits the nomination on their behalf will pretty much always win the award, provided they meet the criteria. So what I would tell you is, no, I don't think reviewers overkill, because you have to keep in mind that there's so many moving parts. So from a submitter's perspective, obviously if you have 7,000, that's a crazy example. If you have 7,000 submissions and you have multiple phases of review and judging processes and communication, we have to provide you as an organization tools to be more efficient. I totally get that. With that said, in your example, the focus needs to shift a little bit. They're clients of yours. If they're submitting nominations on behalf of multiple people, how do we lower the barrier for them and give your applicants the absolute greatest experience as humanly possible, right? Because they're membership, right? How do we engage them? So using a platform like Reviewer obviously allows them to save. They can log out, they can come back. They can receive transparency, they can receive communication. We lower the barrier. It's also possible that you're having redundant stuff being filled out. So we do an award program, which is basically, I don't want to give any client examples. It's a company submitting on behalf of their own clients as well, and the submitter's information doesn't change. Like who they are, their personal information is the same for all of them. What's different is the client and or the different award categories. And so using a tool like Reviewer, it also allows them to carry data over. So I, as Kyle, can submit nominations number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it can preload and pre-populate all the redundant stuff that doesn't change. And that way I'm only filling out the unique questions on that particular client. So I'm having them spend less time and energy. You also mentioned the eligibility criteria. So I want to jump back into Reviewer because this is actually a great feature in our platform that would help with that, but also just in general, is eligibility checks. So jumping ahead, this is super, super popular with scholarship programs where every one of the categories or scholarships might have its own eligibility criteria. Two things happen. Number one is people apply that are not eligible, and that wastes your time having to check that. And two, it wastes the applicant's time filling out for opportunities that they can't even apply to. Also, there might be opportunities that the applicants are not even aware that are present to them. So one feature I love is using this matching tool. So the submitter would answer a series of questions. Now, this is an example. It's only 12 questions. This can be as robust as you need it to be. But what we're really doing here is we're creating what I call an applicant persona. And so our system in real time will read all of these results and it'll say, hey, based on what you just filled out, these are the three awards, or these are the three categories that you're eligible for. Which of or all of do you want to proceed with? With that said, you could also do an eligibility check there that says, unfortunately, you applied to the Bobby Gatsby grant, but you're not eligible for it. Yeah, question that just came in about charging the for submissions. So you charge them for the number of nominations versus at the end versus per nomination. That's ideal. So Reviewer actually has a really robust integration with PayPal Payments Pro. We spend a lot of time and energy vetting all the different payment providers out there. From a rate perspective, they're great, but also allows us to do some really great integrations. So the way that it works is that on the back end, Reviewer will add logic that basically will dictate how much to bill the applicants, right? Are you billing them all at once? Are you going to have a late fee versus an early fee? Are the first two submissions free, but then submissions 3, 4, and 5 are billed? There's a million possibilities, but the applicants will just kind of proceed on. They just fill out their forms, and then we have the logic that's built in that as soon as they go to submit, it adds up all of their submissions and gives them a shopping cart type of concept that says, here's how much is due per application, etc. They then will pay online using the PayPal integration. And then in real time, as a program team, you can look at all of your submissions and see who's paid, who hasn't paid, because it's also possible that they may want to pay by check or by invoice. You have to kind of be able to accommodate all the different methods around it. Really great question. On that note, too, I mean, those are things that maybe we can kind of move offline too. We can kind of dive into the nitty gritty of it, but the reason why I love that too is that so number one is you own all the data in Reviewer, but we also aren't going to be charging you like additional rates for payment. We'll just leave that to the payment processor. I think you're already going to be okay, right? Like we don't need to double charge you for things. So you own your own funds. You can do your own refunding, your own bank transfers. Like we at Review are not involved at touching the money whatsoever. We just bridge the gap between tabulating the amounts, doing the billing, and then passing the data back into our system. Follow up, and I look forward to the next webinar.